Hello and welcome. I am Exit Light and this is my channel. Today I'm going to talk about a subject that I talked about probably 10 years ago. And I know a lot of people have heard about this story, but I also know that if you don't follow these types of things like I do and most of us do, you might not have heard it. And even if you have heard it, you might like a refresher on what happened in this particular case because it is beyond shocking. So, we're going to talk about the unsolved Keddie cabin murders. Before we get started, let's get the business done. Please give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe. Click that bell. As you know, it helps our channels to be seen because they are recommended in the YouTube algorithm when they get action. So comments also really help. Sharing the video also really helps. And as a side note, I started a new Etsy shop where I sell art. I'll put the link below and in this video. And if you feel so inclined, you can head over there and take a peek around. All right. Let's get started on this really devastating case. In 1981, there were 4 horrific murders in a cabin in the town of Keddie, which is in California. Despite the fact that there was an intensive investigation, the Keddie murders to this day remain unsolved, and the case is regarded as Plumas County's greatest crime mystery. Throughout the time, there have been several suspects, and with a completely botched investigation by the authorities, the perpetrators still remain either at large or have died because these events happened 40 years ago. In 1979 or 1980, I just had an accent there, Glenna Sharp, who goes by the name Sue, she left her abusive husband James and she took with her their 5 children in Connecticut. The children's names: John, Sheila, Tina, Rick, and Greg. Sue hurriedly packed up whatever belongings that she could just fit into her car, and the family hit the road. The family started a new life in Quincy, California, which is about 150 miles north of Sacramento. They did this partly because her brother, Don, lived very nearby. They first moved into a 1-bedroom trailer that her brother and his wife had recently moved out of. But the cramped trailer park was not ideal for such a large family, 5 children running around. So Sue decided to move to the Keddie Resort in November of 1981 and rented the Keddie cabin number 28. At the time, John was 15, Sheila was 14, Tina was 12, Rick was 10, and Greg was only 5 years old. Their small wooden cabin opened to the living room from the front door. Beyond the living room was the kitchen and 2 bedrooms. The girls shared 1 bedroom, and the younger boys shared the other. The oldest boy, John, got the ground floor basement all to himself. A flight of stairs led up to the main living room from the ground level in the back of the house. Keddie was a small settlement in Plumas County on the outskirts of Quincy, California. It had once been a bustling resort town as a railroad terminal in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So, obviously, places that had been on railroads were usually, very popular, very well populated. But it had lost almost all of its population because the railroad closed down. That's how we get a lot of our ghost towns. At the center of its hub was the Keddie Resort. It had 33 very rustic, very basic cabins. The town tried to reinvent itself by becoming a recreational camping and hiking resort, as the area was actually perfect for hiking, camping, fishing, and the trails were studded by large pine trees, and they were a favorite amongst hikers. Well, that failed. The Keddie Resort owner, Gary Moloth, turned a series of cabins into low-income rental housing. Then he rented those out long-term for about $170 a month, which is how Sue and her children ended up there. Sue's ex-husband was in the military when they divorced, so the Navy gave her $250 a month. But she also worked part-time at the Quincy Elks Lodge, and she was taking a typing class. Neighbors said that for the most part, she was very quiet, introverted, kept to herself, but that the family was integrating well into the community. The kids were attending school in Quincy, and they were all making friends. Sue was taking a business class, and her classmates said that she was a good student, that she worked very hard, and she had excellent grades. Her classmates also said that she was a loner. She didn't join them for coffee breaks, and she preferred to study alone rather than in groups. However, the local people didn't like the fact that Sue was a, quote, welfare-dependent single mother. So there was unfounded gossip running through the gossip mills. They were saying things like, oh, she dates a lot of men. Oh, she's dealing illegal drugs. Or even, oh, she's a prostitute. A significant reason for the gossip was because Sue did keep to herself. So, as we know, what we don't know, we're afraid of, right? So why not start terrible rumors about a woman who left an abusive husband to save her family? She didn't make friends, and this was most likely because she had spent most of her adult life moving because her husband was in the Navy, and she wasn't establishing any lasting friendships. She just wasn't accustomed to that. On Saturday, April 11th, 1981, Sue and the kids were coming in and out of cabin 28 throughout the day. The oldest boy, John, had a friend named Dana, and they had spent the day in Quincy. At around 1:30 p.m., Sue and her oldest daughter, Sheila, had gone to pick up John and Dana in Quincy. Then, at about 3:30 p.m., the two teenagers headed out again. They had planned to return home later that night. Sue had urged them to not hitchhike, but passers-by spotted John and Dana on the street corner trying to flag a ride home sometime between 9:30 and 10 o'clock that night. Sue had spent the latter part of the afternoon with Sheila and Tina. In the evening, the two girls went to the Seabolt family house, which was next door at cabin 27 and was just 15 feet away. There, they were visiting their friends and they were watching TV. Sheila would spend the night at the Seabolts. On the other hand, Tina went home about 9 o'clock, 9:30, and planned to sleep in her own bed. Ricky and Greg had their friend, Justin Eason, who was just 12 years old. The three boys spent most of the day riding bikes and playing outside. They played until dark. You know the rules. Come in when the lights come on. And they finally came home. And then Justin spent the night in their cabin, cabin 28. Little Greg was the first one to go to bed, and he went to bed about 8:30. And then Tina went to bed about 9 o'clock. Ricky and Justin came and joined Sue to watch the Love Boat, and then they went to bed about 10 o'clock. Sue, however, stayed on the couch watching TV and was probably waiting for John and Dana to return before she went to bed. You know how moms are. That night, people were coming and going out of Keddie. Some were heading to and some were heading from the local bar, which is called the Back Door Bar. Some of the occupants of the other cabins in Keddie Resort did note a few odd things that night. Number one, a dog was barking near cabin 28, and someone noted that the cats paced in and out of the house all night when they usually slept. Another saw a back porch light on at 4 o'clock in the morning at cabin 28, but these seemed to be random events and they didn't raise any alarm. Hindsight, you know, tells us everything we need to know, but at the time, little things like that don't add up to much, right? And then a woman and her boyfriend in the cabin next door woke up around 1:30 a.m. and they heard muffled screams. Both of them got up and they looked around, but they could not tell where the screams were coming from, so they returned to bed. The following morning, April 12th, 1981, somewhere between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning, Sheila Sharp returned home from her sleepover next door. She had intended to quickly change into clothing that was suitable for church and then go with the Seabolts. However, when she entered the home, what she found was beyond comprehension. She discovered a massacre, and she opened the front door of her living room, and blood was everywhere. The living room was in complete chaos, and Sheila's mother, Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old brother, John Sharp, and her brother's 17-year-old friend, Dana Wingate, were lying on the floor. Her brother Johnny was lying face up, covered in blood, and the other boy was face down, and they were both tied at the feet. She saw a yellow blanket covering another body, but she didn't know who that was. Sheila ran screaming back to the neighboring cabin where she had spent the night. This was cabin 27, where the Seabolt family lived. That family included James Sr., his wife, Zanita, and their daughters, Alyssa and Paula, and one son, James, who they called Jamie. At 8:05 on Sunday, April 12th, the sheriff's dispatch received a call from Jan Albin, who was the co-owner of the Keddie Resort. She reported the possibility of a homicide in cabin 28. The Seabolts didn't have a telephone. Someone from that cabin had ran to the lodge to report the crime. While the crime was reported, Jamie Seabolt, Sheila Sharp, and possibly Zanita Seabolt returned to cabin 28. Miraculously, they found that the three boys in the house, Rick, Greg, and their friend Justin, were safe and well in the bedroom. They were still asleep and seemingly completely unaware of what had happened. They had slept through the entire massacre happening downstairs. Jamie ushered them out of the house through the bedroom window to protect them from seeing what was in the living room. Sheila sent Justin home to his parents, and the boys waited for the police to arrive. James continued to explore the house, looking for any more survivors. Because Sheila hadn't been sure who the person under the blanket was, and because the boys were unharmed, it was unclear who may still be in the house. Jamie took notice of the fact that the back door had been left open. He walked to the cabin. He called out over and over, but when no one appeared and no one responded, he went ahead and left and rejoined the others outside. The crime scene was not contained to preserve valuable evidence, and the Plumas County Sheriff's Office made a series of errors and oversights. Deputy Hank Clement was the first one on the scene, followed by Sergeant Jerry Shaver, who took statements. Then Sheriff Sylvester Doug Thomas and Assistant Sheriff Ken Sharks arrived, and Don Stoy joined them. I want to say these names very clearly so that you remember them. Attempts to preserve the crime scene were minimal at best. And it wasn't until all five of them, had completely walked through the home that photographs were finally taken of the scene, with all of these footprints, not just them, but Jamie, too. Officers then conducted house-by-house welfare checks, and they interviewed potential witnesses, and it wasn't until several hours later that they noticed that Tina was unaccounted for. The police found all three of the victims had been bound with electrical wire and medical tape before they were systematically bludgeoned to death with a claw hammer. In addition to the hammer wounds, Sue and John had also been stabbed numerous times with a knife, and their throats had been cut. Sue had additionally been struck with the butt of a rifle, and she had defensive wounds on her arms, indicated that she had put up quite a fight. She was also found naked from the waist down. She was gagged using a bandana and her own underwear. Tape secured the gag in place. There were no signs of sexual assault on Sue, but blood patterns indicated that her legs were initially splayed apart. But someone moved her and covered her body with a yellow blanket post-mortem. Perhaps one of the surviving children in the house? Dana's autopsy concluded that in addition to the wounds caused by the claw hammer, he had been manually strangled. Discarded in the living room near the bodies was a knife that had been used during the attack. Chillingly, it had been used with such force that the blade had bent. There was also another steak knife found that came from the kitchen, a hammer, and a plastic piece from a BB gun. Sue had clearly put up a fight during the attack, as she had defensive wounds on her arms, but John and Dana did not. All of their injuries happened after the killers tied them up. The blood at the scene wasn't confined to just the floor or the victims either. Blood was additionally discovered on the wallpaper in one of the bedrooms, on the living room ceiling, and splattered across the furniture. The bottoms of Sue's bare feet and the soles of one of the boys' shoes were also covered in blood, which indicated that they were walking at some point during the attack and had stepped in the blood. There had even been blood discovered on both of the bedroom doors and outside on the handrails of the back steps. Although the Sharps' cabin did not show any indication of a forced entry, detectives recovered an unidentified fingerprint from the hand railing leading to the cabin's back door. They also discovered that the telephone had been left off the hook, the lights had been shut off, and all the drapes were fully closed. Due to the immense amount of chaos, it took police quite a few hours before anyone realized that 12-year-old Tina was nowhere to be found in the cabin. There were some bloodstains on her bedding, however, which suggested that she might have been kidnapped from her bed after the murders. Tina wanted to stay overnight at the Seabolt's cabin with Sheila, but Sue hadn't allowed her. Members of the Plumas County Search and Rescue Team scoured the Keddie area looking for Tina, but they couldn't find her. An all-points bulletin was sent to Lassen, Butte, Sierra counties, and Reno, asking them to please keep an eye out for her. So we know that some neighbors near Cabin 28 had reported the screams and muffled groans between 1 and 2 a.m., and they couldn't determine where the screams were coming. Then, also, we know that witnesses had seen John and Dana trying to hitchhike near the corner of Crescent Street and Lawrence Street in Quincy, near the Gold Pan Motel. And this was somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m. on the night of the murders. The 3 boys who survived said they slept through the incident, although, considering the sheer level of the violence that took place in there, this seems pretty impossible. Also, the murderers must have been aware of the 3 remaining boys in the cabin. Investigators theorized that someone might have interrupted the murders taking place before the murderer had a chance to kill the other children in their bedrooms. Later, police learned that perhaps not all the boys had been asleep. Forensic examination confirmed that the weapons used on the victims' heads were 2 different hammers and a BB gun in Sue's case. The plastic piece that the police found in Cabin 28 matched up to a Daisy 880 BB gun. Additionally, the same weapon matched the impressions of the butt of the gun left on Sue's head. Early on in the investigation, robbery was completely ruled out as a motive because there didn't seem to be anything missing from the cabin. Investigators then theorized that the murders had probably been premeditated and that it had been perpetrated by 2, possibly more assailants, one of which had brought along a claw hammer and then used an additional hammer and the 2 knives that were from inside the cabin already. What really perplexed investigators, though, was that it had been so violent and so frenzied, yet nobody had heard a thing. Not Greg or Rick or Justin or the neighbors who lived 15 feet away in the adjacent cabin. For the first few weeks of the investigation, the Plumas County Sheriff's Department had 8 investigators working on this case 24/7. They implemented a secret witness program and subsequently released sketches of 2 men who were seen in Quincy the week before the murders. They had said that they were not necessarily suspects, but that they had been around the area and had vanished shortly before the crimes. They had also been seen by more than one witness. Sheriff's Sergeant Steve Wright said, "By the time a year had elapsed, we would reenact and investigate leads as they came in." Early on, investigators believed that Justin Eason either knew more than he was telling the police, or that he had blocked out most of his memories due to the trauma of seeing the attack. They also suspected that Justin touched at least one of the bodies, since blood was found on the inside doorknob of the bedroom that the boys had been sleeping in. Investigators were mystified as to how the boys could have slept through this attack in the first place. How could the boys not have heard anything? Sue was defending herself. Would she not have been screaming out for help? She knew there were other people in the house. So would she have screamed out for help? Or would she have not, to not alert the murderers to the other people in the house? What about 15 feet away? Maybe if she wasn't screaming, to not alert the murderers to other people in the house, maybe that's why they didn't hear anything. But there were neighbors that heard muffled screams. So maybe that was after something had been put in her mouth. After some time and plenty of persuasion, Justin's story began to change. About a month after the Keddie murders took place, he told his therapist that he was, quote, having dreams about the murder, but he wasn't sure whether it was a dream or reality. During a polygraph test, Justin stated that he thought he might have witnessed the murders. He was woken up by a noise, he said, so he got up to go and he looked through the door to the living room and he saw Sue lying on the sofa with two men standing in the middle of the room. He told investigators that he dreamed that he saw a body covered in a sheet lying on the floor. When he picked up the sheet, he found the body of Sue with a knife protruding from her chest. He desperately tried to patch her wound with a rag, which he tossed into the water. Sue did have a knife sticking out of her chest when the police found her. Justin described the men to a sketch artist, who was then able to create a composite sketch of the suspects. Perhaps he was too afraid to admit the truth, or maybe Justin didn't know for sure what was true and what was a figment of his imagination. Was it possible that he had either witnessed the murders or awoke at some point during the night but had blocked it out? Well, they were going to find out. They took him and put him under hypnosis in an attempt to recall any details of that night. Justin said that he was watching TV in the boys' room before falling asleep. Then he began hearing noises in the living room, and he claimed to have seen Sue with two men. One was tall with blonde hair and a mustache, while the other was shorter, dark-haired, and clean-shaven. Justin recalled that both men wore glasses, and that the two older boys, John and Dana, came home while Sue was talking to the men. Somehow, this erupted into a serious, violent incident between them, which resulted in the murders. Justin also claimed that Tina came out shortly after, and one of the men abducted her and took her out the back door. 3 years later, on April 22nd, 1984, Ronald Pedrini, who was a bottle hunter, was in the woods near Feather Falls, which is northwest of Oroville and about 65 miles from Keddie, when he came upon a human skull and a mandible. Investigators initially thought that they may belong to a Native American, but they got an anonymous call from the sheriff's office, who told them that the remains belonged to Tina Sharp. 2 months later, a forensic analysis of the teeth confirmed that they were, indeed, Tina's remains. According to the medical examiner, Tina had died sometime after November 1st, 1981, 6 months after the Keddie murders. Because of the advanced decomposition, her cause of death could not be determined. But near her bones in the woods, detectives also discovered a pair of jeans with a missing back pocket, a blue jacket, a blanket, and an empty surgical tape dispenser. The first suspects to emerge in the case were Martin Ray Smart and John Boo Bede. Both men had criminal records, and Boo Bede had ties to organized crime in Chicago. Before her murder, Sue was said to be counseling Smart's wife, Marilyn, about leaving her husband because he was allegedly abusive and was having affairs behind her back. At the same time, however, there were rumors that Sue and Smart had been having an affair. When investigators spoke with Marilyn Smart, she told them that she and Marty separated the day after the murders and called Marty short-tempered, violent, and abusive. When Marilyn was investigated again later, she informed investigators that Marty hated John Sharp and that she saw Martin burning something in the fireplace on the morning of April 22nd. Investigators also interviewed a man who used to live in cabin 28, but he had moved out 2 weeks before the Sharps moved in. He claimed that he did not know the Sharps, but he said that 3 weeks before the massacre, he overheard Sue and an unknown man arguing loudly. The two allegedly continued to scream obscenities back and forth at each other for about 30 minutes before the argument finally ended. During his interrogation, Marty told the police that his hammer with a blue handle had gone missing. He also told investigators that his stepson, Justin, might have seen something on the night of the murder without the killer detecting the boy. The police did not arrest or interview Marty again. After his interrogation, Marty Smart left Keddie and went to live in Reno, then Oregon, and then he died there in 2000 from cancer-related issues. Marty was a personal friend of the local county sheriff, Doug Thomas, at the time of the crime. Moreover, it appears that Marty confessed to the murders to two separate people. However, investigators must have buried these facts until 2016, when new discoveries reignited this case. Marty's counselor at the Veterans Administration in Reno told police that Marty confessed to killing Sue and Tina, but not the boys. According to the story, Marty said that he was angry that Sue had convinced Marilyn to leave him. On the other hand, his reason for killing Tina was that she had seen everything. As a result, he couldn't allow her to live. Although the counselor initially reported Marty's statements to the police not long after the killings, the police did not bother to log in that information as evidence or even follow up with that tip. Also, keep this in mind. If he wanted to kill her for seeing the murder, why didn't he kill her? Remember, she didn't die till 6 months after the killings. So if Marty was in fact involved, that would mean that he had kept Tina. Marilyn said that she had found Tina's bloody jacket in their basement and had given it to the police during the early investigation. And, unfortunately, there is no record of this ever happening. If she did turn in a jacket, the police, once again, did not acknowledge it as evidence. In a 2008 documentary, she said that she believed Marty was the murderer and that he had even confessed it to her in writing. In a letter, Marty supposedly said, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want?" Guess what? The police never admitted this letter as evidence. It may be that Sue Sharp and Marty Smart were having an affair. Sue was counseling Marilyn to leave Marty, and some investigators believe that Marilyn was maybe somehow complicit in the murders. It seems possible that Marilyn learned about the affair between Marty and Sue. The statement from Marty's letter said, "What else do you want?" It sounds like Marty is asking, in addition to what you already asked for, what more do you want me to do? I agree with that. That was my first thought when I read what that letter said. I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through? Great. What else do you want? What does that sound like to you? Marilyn moved out of cabin 26 the day after the murders. and she later remarried. John Bobede, who went by the name Bo, was Marty's friend, and he had been living at Marty's house. The two had only met weeks before the killings when Bo was receiving treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder at the nearby Veterans Administration Hospital. On the night of the murders, Marilyn, Bo, and Marty had been out together at the local bar. All three returned home later, but Marty and Bo went out again. When they returned to the bar much later, they wore suits, as if they had spent the evening at a business meeting. One theory is that they really wanted people to notice them sitting in the bar. During the interrogation after the murders, Bo told police that he worked as a police officer in Chicago for 18 years. However, this turned out to be a lie. He also exaggerated about how long he had lived in Keddie. Additionally, he said that Marilyn was his niece. That was also a lie. Some sources claim that Bo had a crush on Sue, and she had rejected him 2 times. Despite his lies and inconsistencies in his stories, the police cleared him as a suspect. Later, investigators learned that Bo had a criminal record and was working as an enforcer with the mafia in Chicago. Investigators believe he was cooperating with the Department of Justice as an informant. This may be why the Department of Justice in Sacramento stepped in the Keddie case very, very early. But curiously, instead of sending homicide detectives, they sent organized crime investigators to Keddie. It is unclear what evidence links Bo to the mafia. Nonetheless, it raises many questions. Why was this man in Keddie? Was this why detectives never adequately investigated Bo? Were they told to stand down? Is this why detectives seemed to turn a blind eye to the many clues and completely disregarded evidence? Were they protecting their informant? Bo left Keddie after the murders and he returned to Chicago, where he died in 1988. In 2013, the Plumas County Sheriff, Greg Hagwood, hired Mike Gamberg as a special investigator. Gamberg was a young deputy in 1981 and was not involved in the case at the time, but he had a great interest in it. From 1974 until his retirement in 1994, Mike had worked all of the murders in Plumas County, except for one. The one that he wasn't allowed to cover was the Keddie murder case. Gamberg also knew the 2 boys. He was their coach in martial arts and other activities. Dana Wingate was at his house the day before he died. 32 years later, he still has strong opinions about what happened in that case. Both Hagwood and Gamberg said that residents had minimal trust or confidence in the sheriff's department before the murders. Gee, I wonder why. There was even less trust following the deaths, and people were generally afraid in the area since the attackers had never been found. Hagwood told People magazine at one point, quote, "I am not by nature a conspiracy theorist, but there are facts and circumstances, the number and nature of which I cannot ignore anymore." Box after box of evidence, file drawers filled with information and other evidence were all in disarray. Physical evidence taken from Cabin 28 was still in storage, including the living room carpet wallboard, and other items marked with blood. However, some of the evidence in storage was contaminated or destroyed, as it had been placed in a freezer to preserve it, and it went bad. In 2016, a man with a metal detector found a hammer in a dried up pond near Keddie's entrance, and it matched the description of the one Marty had given in his interrogation, saying that it was stolen. Sheriff Hagwood believed that the location could not have been accidental, and that someone intentionally threw it in the water. Gamberg also discovered a hunting knife in the Keddie under some junk near the old Keddie store, which matched the one used in the murders. In November of 2016, the true crime show People Magazine Investigates released an episode dedicated to re-examining the Keddie cabin murders. The show stated that Smart's anger towards Sue Sharp for interfering in his marriage was a viable motive for the killings. In April 2018, Gamberg matched the DNA from the murder scene to a known living suspect. Since then, no arrests have been made, and the names have never been released. Nevertheless, Gamberg said that 6 people may have been involved. In Gamberg's opinion, you could take someone just coming out of the academy and they'd have done a better job of investigating that case. Leads in the original police investigation were not followed, and the evidence was not checked. Some of the evidence was completely ignored. Since Tina was abducted, the FBI was involved. But despite this, the case was clearly badly managed. According to Gamberg, Sheriff Doug Thomas contacted the DOJ in Sacramento, who sent special agents Harry Bradley and P.A. Krim from the division's organized crime unit, not from homicide, to investigate. The only way this decision by the DOJ makes any sense is by considering the background of Bo, Smart's friend, because he had known connections with organized crime in Chicago. Bo had at least 2 other known aliases as Bobby Lake and John DeSantis. Along with the special agents Krim and Bradley, Spiro Vasos, a fingerprint expert, and Bruce Palmer, an evidence expert, also arrived from the DOJ. Plenty of evidence was analyzed, but nothing useful was apparently gathered that could lead to an arrest. Gamberg was quoted as saying, "This case is as screwed up as a soup sandwich. It's not about what was done, but what was not done." He also compared the available evidence in 1981 to someone firing a shotgun loaded with evidence, and no one followed up on it, as if it all spread out like pellets. It was just left scattered, and it wasn't followed. The massacre marked the end for the resort, with killer or killers unknown never being identified. Frightened tourists began to stay away from Keddie, and it became a derelict ghost town. Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004. Sue Sharp's surviving children left California to live with an aunt. Unfortunately, they later went into foster care, as their aunt already had several children and she couldn't handle the responsibilities. Sheila Sharp says that she has blocked out many of her memories from the morning of April 22nd, 1981. But the quadruple murders have continued to have a profound effect on her life. Sheila is in her early 50s now. She is married and the mother of 3 children and the grandmother of 2 children. In a 2016 interview, Sheila said, "One of the main things I have a hard time with is getting close to people for fear that something's going to happen. And I know I always look around. I'm not as, I guess, I'm more cautious of my surroundings." When Sheila and her siblings were placed in foster care, they were first placed together and then apart. Sheila was forced to become a sort of surrogate mother to her younger surviving siblings, and she made it her mission to protect them and insulate them from the horrors of April 21st, 1981, as much as possible. Life for Sheila has been a struggle. It's been dotted with victories, joys, and reasons to celebrate. She said that being able to close the case would be a relief for the family, a small bit of closure. But what she wants more than anything is for people to remember her mother's kindness more than they remember the violent fate that ended her life. She's quoted as saying, "I would like my kids and grandkids to know that she was a very caring person and that she would have done anything for them and probably spoiled them rotten." Thank you for coming to my channel, and good night.